Have you ever seen something that no one else seemed to notice? It was an ordinary morning at the Vatican. The sun was slicing through the sky with golden rays, and St. Peter's Square was filled with pilgrims, families, priests, tourists, kneeling nuns, people with eyes brimming with faith or despair. Pope Leo XIV walked in silence, flanked by cardinals, heading toward the altar, specially set for the consecration of the holy martyrs of Antioch, a solemn event with no promise of miracles. Until it happened. At the exact moment the Pope raised the chalice, just as always, with the same ritual firmness repeated for centuries, something shifted in the air. It wasn't a noise, it was a heavy silence, a void. And then the shadow appeared. A massive, dark shape was cast over him. There were no clouds in the sky, no obstacles, no aerial structure, no explanation. But the shadow was there, cold, heavy, completely covering the Pope, as if the heavens had withdrawn. Some faithfuls stood up in alarm. Others looked up and saw nothing, only light, blue sky. Yet the shadow persisted. It was filmed, photographed. But the files disappeared minutes later. Security guards confiscated cell phones from some people. The Vatican's communication team interrupted the live broadcast, citing technical issues. But it was already too late. 3 seers, from different origins and with no connection, claimed at the same time to have seen something behind the shadow, a face. "The eyes were not human," one of the seers said, trembling. "It was like a veil. Someone or something was watching from behind the veil." Others reported feeling a chill, a presence that was neither holy nor demonic, something else, ancient, as if an invisible scale had been tipped at that moment. Some priests went into shock. A bishop fainted while trying to ascend the altar, and the Pope, he remained motionless, as if he already knew. After that day, something changed in his appearance. His wrinkles seemed deeper, his gaze more distant, and for weeks he didn't appear in public without a double security detail. The Vatican issued a brief statement. Light refraction caused by an external reflection. But not even the scientists consulted could replicate the shadow. What really appeared over Pope Leo XIV? You won't find that image on social media anymore, but those who were there will never forget. And you, if you had been in that square, would you have looked up? Would you trust your own eyes if everyone around you claimed that what you saw didn't happen? That same afternoon, as the Vatican went silent in response to the uproar over the shadow above the Pope, a select group of experts in spiritual phenomena was discreetly summoned. Among them was Monsignor Giacomo Bellardi, theologian, exorcist, and scholar of what the Vatican calls manifestatio invisibilis, unidentified spiritual manifestations. A serious man, marked by decades of spiritual warfare, and he was blunt. If that was not human, it was permitted. While the media focused on obvious theories, drones, reflections, technical glitches, Bellardi followed another line: patterns of the invisible. According to him, there are similar records in church history, all suppressed, documents archived in secret sections, sealed tight. In 1938, a similar shadow reportedly appeared over the body of Pius XV, days before the signing of the Lateran Pacts. In 1965, during Vatican II, a nun claimed to see a hooded figure hovering over the ceiling of the Pauline Chapel. All accounts were silenced, but this time was different, because there were too many witnesses. And one of them was considered untouchable. Sister Rosaria of Fatima, survivor of a miracle in Medjugorje, publicly stated 2 days later, what hovered over the Pope was not a shadow. It was a seal, a sign, a warning. And she added with a choked voice, "Not against him, but against the time that is coming." Her statement was quickly censored. The video vanished from the platform in less than 30 minutes. Her account was suspended, but the seed had already been planted. Hidden forums exploded. Seers from Lebanon, Mexico, and Ethiopia reported similar dreams that very night. A figure in black garments, covered in ancient symbols, raising a chalice over an altar and pouring it out. Not wine, but something dark as tar. Was it a coincidence? Or were they all seeing parts of the same warning? The Vatican remained silent, but tension was visible in the corridors. Swiss Guard patrols doubled at night. The Apostolic Library closed for renovations. And the Pope cancelled his next pastoral trip without explanation. Between the lines, something was moving, invisible, but not harmless. And you? Have you ever wondered why certain truths are called heresy, just because no one dares to name them? Have you ever felt that someone is hiding something, and that this something could change everything you believe? 3 days after the shadow incident, Pope Leo XIV vanished from public appearances. The Vatican announced he was in spiritual retreat, with no press access or visitors, but an internal source, a guard from the papal wing whose name was never revealed, let slip a phrase that hit like dynamite among occult scholars. He asked to sleep in the Sistine Chapel. No one understood. The Sistine Chapel is not a bedroom. It's a temple, a sanctuary, a work of art, a space of sacred beauty, but also loaded with apocalyptic symbolism. Michelangelo's frescoes, so admired by tourists, hide layers of interpretation known only to the initiated. On the ceiling, Adam reaches for God's hand, but behind the iconic gesture lies the anatomy of a human brain. In the Last Judgment, the saints float, but the condemned scream in agony. The central Christ's eyes, stern, penetrating, are not merciful, they are judging. Why would a pope sleep there? And right after being enveloped by an unexplainable shadow. The auxiliary Archbishop of Milan, Dom Stefano Lurani, later revealed under oath that Leo XIV was investigating a lost portion of an ancient manuscript attributed to Malachi, the same who prophesied the succession of popes. This section, he said, was never published, and in tiny letters it contained the following phrase: "When the altar is covered without cloud, the last shall be marked." The last! Could Leo XIV be the end of a lineage, or was the prophecy referring to the altar itself, covered by a shadow without a single cloud in the sky? The Pope spent 3 nights in the Sistine Chapel, and on the final night, according to the guard's testimony, a loud noise woke the entire wing. A crash, like wood being splintered, but there was no wind, no one outside. The next morning, Leo XIV appeared at a private mass with an unrecognizable expression, deep eye bags, deathly pale. And in his homily, he uttered only one sentence before abruptly ending: "Some shadows are not absence of light. They are the presence of something light cannot penetrate." This phrase is not recorded in the Vatican's official annals, but it was heard by everyone present. Since then, Seers began describing recurring dreams of a throne veiled in black drapes, and the Pope absent. And what if that shadow was not an isolated event? What if it was tied to a revelation that has been hidden from the world for centuries? Would you still trust the lights of the altar? Have you ever noticed that darkness sometimes enters through the brightest places? While the international media rushed to debunk conspiracy theories and explain the shadow through solar refraction, a quiet movement was forming among Carmelite monks in northern Italy. They claimed to have found, in an abandoned monastery since 1862, a manuscript that matched the reports of the shadow, a dark codex with aged pages inscribed in archaic Latin and Kabbalistic symbols. The title, Umbra Signata, the marked shadow. 3 pages were photographed before the manuscript was seized by church authorities. On them, a sequence of symbols appeared to form a progression. First, a chalice, then a cracked crown, and finally, a flaming altar shrouded by a shadow with eyes. At the bottom, in nearly erased letters, read, "When the chalice is lifted and the shadow does not flee, you will know that time is no longer counted by men, but by the heavens." Is that the time we are living in? Even while secluded, the Pope sent a sealed letter to 5 bishops. One of these letters was partially leaked by a courier translator, who described it as a call to silent vigilance. And once again, a phrase stood out: "The veil moves, but it has not yet been torn." What does it mean? For some theologians, the veil symbolizes the separation between the visible and the invisible, between the human and the divine. For others, the veil now covering the altar is not cloth, it is spiritual. It is the warning before the revelation. Meanwhile, reports began to emerge from around the world. Faithful fainting during Mass, lights going out during Gregorian chants, statues weeping, not blood, but a black, oily substance. And at the center of it all, Pope Leo XIV's name kept resurfacing, as if the shadow had not merely covered his body, but marked something in his soul. A blind child, upon touching a photo of the moment the shadow appeared, said spontaneously, "That man saw someone from the other side." Authorities, of course, dismissed it, called it sensationalism, but records continue to mount. And one question grows unbearable among those who sense something is drawing near. Was what covered the altar just a shadow, or was it a warning? And if it was a warning, who was it meant for? Have you ever thought a secret could be so great that revealing it would change the world forever? Pope Leo XIV did not appear again. For weeks, only dry notes were released by his press office. Fragile health, spiritual reflection, private moment. But within the Vatican walls, the atmosphere was entirely different. Piercing silence, locked doors, entire rooms emptied, and most unsettling of all, the secret library was sealed by papal decree, something not even Benedict XVI or John Paul II had done in times of crisis. But why? A Dominican monk who served as cataloguer of ancient documents reported seeing Leo XIV during his last internal appearance, holding an object wrapped in purple cloth. According to him, the Pope was trembling and murmuring a single phrase as he walked through the dark corridors. "It's closer than we think. It is no longer a symbol. It is presence." Days later, that same monk disappeared. No exit record, no witnesses. Around the world, signs intensified. In Jerusalem, a sandstorm covered Mount Zion in the middle of summer. In Fatima, pilgrims claimed to see 3 black dots forming a perfect triangle above the Chapel of Apparitions. And in a small Ethiopian church, a wooden cross split in half during a silent mass, seconds before the gospel reading. Seers warned the shadow over the Pope was the first seal, not a punishment, but a rupture, as if the invisible fabric separating the two worlds was beginning to wear thin. The spiritual world is drawing nearer, but not in the way many expect. In a clandestine interview, a former nun revealed the existence of a room in the Vatican called the Grey Room, where recordings of unexplained phenomena are stored. Events during Mass, distorted apparitions, voices captured by mics that weren't connected. And according to her, the shadow over Leo XIV was just another entry in that secret collection. But here's what few know. Leo XIV, even before becoming Pope, was obsessed with a single question. When the visible and invisible touch again, who will fall first? Now he may have the answer. And you? Do you have the courage to find yours? If this video made you think, like it, share it with someone who needs to wake up, and comment with the name of the city you're watching from. The truth is moving, and it may be closer than you think. Have you ever felt someone watching you, even when you're alone? While the world slept under the comfort of logical explanations, a document surfaced from the silent depths of the Vatican. It didn't emerge through the press or official channels. It was leaked. A digital file titled Obscura Circum Altare, Darkness Around the Altar, containing 11 pages written in Latin and Old Italian. No seal, no signature. But within it, something disturbing, a sketch identical to the shadow that hovered over Leo XIV, humanoid form, faceless, arms outstretched, hollow eyes. The text was even more disturbing. It described a similar apparition in the 9th century near Ravenna during a Eucharistic celebration in times of plague. The bishop of that time wrote in his diary, "I saw a dark figure behind me as I consecrated the bread. When I turned, nothing was there, but the chalice trembled in my hand." Coincidence? or cycles repeating. After the leak, 2 apostolic library staff were dismissed, and the Vatican's internal network was offline for 11 hours. No explanation was ever given. Meanwhile, a small group of theological investigators, calling themselves the Silent Ones, gathered evidence that the shadow was not a metaphor, not a warning. It was an entity, a being that does not dwell in time as we know it, a being that had appeared before, always at moments of transition, ruin, or judgment. They discovered scattered records of this figure under different names through the centuries. Umbrix in the Middle Ages, the fourth man of shadows in the time of the martyrs, Ad Cecum in the scrolls of the Judean desert, and always tied to one question: who will dare speak when it appears? Leo XIV, it seems, dared, but speak to whom? The night after his last appearance, security cameras captured something on top of St. Peter's Basilica. For 13 seconds, a black figure stood motionless at the dome's peak, as if watching the entire city. The image was shared on a hidden forum by a former Vatican engineer, but the post vanished, and so did his profile. Are we facing a silent presence or a silent judgment? Have you considered that faith more than a choice, maybe an invisible battlefield? Would you dare continue celebrating, knowing invisible eyes are watching, while the world remained distracted by political scandals and natural disasters? Something was sealed beneath the Vatican, literally. Confidential sources reported that a crypt beneath St. Peter's Basilica, known only to the oldest cardinals as Domus Obscura, was sealed with fresh cement and placed under armed guard. No access, no explanation. The reason: an object allegedly discovered there by Leo XIV days before the shadow appeared. An object wrapped in 7 cloths, each marked with a different symbol: fire, serpent, inverted cross, broken star, blood, eye, and veil. It is said the object was found by accident during a hidden restoration. But the most disturbing detail was what one of the restorers saw engraved on its surface: Invisibilis venit, sed tanget. The invisible will come, but it will touch. Touch what, or whom? Leo XIV knew, and after that day his words became few, rare, and filled with long pauses, as if he was no longer speaking for himself. A secret recording, made by a worker cleaning the papal office, caught a whispered phrase in the dark: "The shadow did not cover me, it chose me." Then everything made sense. The silence, the disappearance, the quiet fear among bishops, the strange cancellation of public masses. Leo XIV was not merely protecting himself, he was isolating himself, so as not to contaminate the altar with what now followed him. The shadow was not a visit, it was a harvest. And while the world continued its rituals, something began to change in Catholic celebrations. In different parts of the world, priests reported that the moment of consecration began to bring an invisible weight into the room. Candles fell by themselves, chalices cracked, and strangest of all, the sound of the Eucharistic bell began to echo, even in places with no structure for echo, as if something or someone was there, behind, above, beside. The shadow does not just cover the body, it covers the atmosphere, the sacred, the language, the sound. Have you ever entered a church and felt that the light didn't pass through? Exactly. And what if this shadow is spreading discreetly, altar by altar, across the world? Would you endure seeing your faith touched by something that isn't faith? On the 8th day, after Leo XIV's disappearance, a nearly forgotten detail came to light. A relic the Pope had secretly requested weeks before the shadow, the fragment of the temple veil from Jerusalem, preserved allegedly authentically at the monastery of San Giovanni in Laterano. According to tradition, the veil separated the Holy of Holies, the place only the high priest could enter once a year with fear and sacrifice. At Jesus' crucifixion, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Matthew 27:51. It was the rupture between the divine and the human, between the hidden and the revealed. But now Leo XIV wanted to touch that veil, not to display it, but to understand what remained hidden. A former pontifical guard revealed anonymously that Leo XIV spent hours before the relic, touching the cloth with trembling fingers, whispering scripture, and at one moment he knelt and said, "The veil tore, but not entirely. Something remained, and now it wants out." That night thunder rumbled over Rome despite clear skies. Lightning struck the Basilica dome, just like in 2013 when Benedict XVI resigned. But this time there was no resignation. There was silence and a prayer, just one, short, but unlike any other, scribbled on the back cover of Leo XIII's diary. "Lord of the Veils, may your light not fear to enter where the shadow sits. If I have become an altar of something I do not understand, purify me with your judgment." But what if the judgment is already inside? Since then, the atmosphere in the Vatican has changed. Priests began celebrating Mass with less incense, claiming feelings of nausea. 2 seminarians abandoned their studies after having the same dream with the same phrase. He opened his eyes, but they were not his. The shadow is no longer just in censored videos. It's in the gestures of those who tremble before the altar, in the eyes of those who look up and see only darkness, in the faithful who in silence feel the difference, but can't explain it. And you, if you stood in the presence of the sacred and felt something cold touch you inside, would you close your eyes or face it? Would you know how to tell the difference between the presence of God and a presence pretending to be him? The shadow that covered Pope Leo XIV did not disappear. It simply changed places. It no longer hovers over visible altars. It spreads through words, symbols, gestures, occupying spaces where reverence once dwelled, and now only unease remains. Inside the Roman Curia, something was enacted. The forced liturgical silence. Televised masses began to be cut off at the moment of consecration. Internal documents forbade any public mention of the shadow incident. And most chilling, ancient prayers began to be subtly rewritten. A missing comma, a replaced word, a softened invocation. It's subtle, but it's real. On the outskirts of Turin, an excommunicated priest revealed he received an anonymous letter reading, "Do not touch the chalice again. It has already been touched." The letter included a blurry image. It was the figure many had described as the shadow over the Pope, but this time it was kneeling before the altar, as if praying or pretending to pray. The final deception, the shadow that does not oppose faith, but mimics it. An ancient deception, foretold in Scripture, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light, 2 Corinthians 11:14. But that light is cold, lifeless, truthless. Leo XIV seems to have understood that too late. One of the last recordings of his voice, leaked by a nun in the Vatican hospital, contains a whispered phrase. It speaks like the Lamb, but looks like the abyss. That shadow, according to Seers, does not want to destroy the altar. It wants to inhabit it. And for that, it must convince the world that it is holy, that its silence is peace, that its darkness is divine mystery, that its lack of emotion is reverence. But those trained by the Spirit recognize it. They feel the chill on their skin, the invisible weight on their shoulders, the strange void in their hearts. Even during prayer, the Pope saw, felt, tried to warn, but perhaps it was already too late, and now, perhaps he is alone. And you, when you're before the sacred, will you know whether you are looking at God or at a shadow with hollow eyes? Have you ever thought that the greatest spiritual battle might be happening inside what you always thought was safe? Since the day of the shadow, the name Leo XIV has disappeared from all statements. His last encyclical was never published, his schedule erased, his appearances cancelled. The most visible man on earth had become a whisper. But for those with discernment, his silence screamed, and in certain hidden circles, a theory emerged. The Pope is not dead, but neither is he alone. Seers and exorcists from different countries began to describe the same vision. Leo XIV, locked in a white room, no windows, sitting on a wooden chair before a faceless crucifix, and beside him, the shadow, not touching him, not threatening, just watching, as if waiting. But waiting for what? That's when the final document surfaced. A letter sent by a missionary from the Holy Land who had retreated into the desert to pray. He claimed to have had a direct vision of the Pope wrapped in a black cloud saying, "The altar is no longer safe. The vestments do not protect me, but the one who conquered death has already revealed the end to me." The letter ends with 3 words, "It shall be exposed." But who? The shadow? The institution? Leo himself? Many did not understand. But something began to change. Empty churches, even on holy days. Silence during hymns. A strange sensation in confessionals, as if sins were no longer heard, only watched. And the more attentive faithful began to notice. The shadow does not want to be fought. It wants to be worshipped. That is why it hides in vestments, in soft lights, in rituals. It does not scream, it whispers. It does not destroy, it persuades. But the question Leo XIV seems to have left behind is not about the shadow. It's about you. Would you recognize the sound of truth if the altar that proclaims it were shrouded in darkness? It's not just about what appeared over the Pope. It's about what is silently forming within global faith. It's about training your eyes before it's too late. Like this video, if something stirred in you, share it with someone who needs to open their eyes. And comment, from which city are you watching this message? The time of the shadow may have begun, but the time of the light can still be chosen, the end.